Hey there, Soul Warriors. Welcome to episode 2 in the midst of season 5 of the Recovery Soul Food podcast. I'm so excited today to be sitting in the energy of this amazing guest, Dr. Peg O'Connor. And I'm actually going to read a bit of her bio, and then I'm going to tell you what this guest means to me. But as you know, season 5 is the season of the virtual mentors. And I was just telling Dr. Peg how important virtual mentorship was to me in the very beginning of my recovery process. And in 2 days, I'm going to be celebrating 10 consecutive years in recovery. And that means so much to me because, to be honest, I've never celebrated any time in recovery. Honestly, I've done a year or so with sobriety, but never in the space of recovery, which is a healing process from the inside out. And so it is very important for me to share this time and with you the amazingness of Dr. Peg O'Connor. So I want to read a little bit of Dr. Peg's bio, and then I'm going to tell you what she means to me. Peg O'Connor, PhD, is a professor of philosophy who regularly teaches courses in moral and social philosophy and on the subjects of addiction, trauma, and oppression. Peg is also a recovering alcoholic of 35 years who believes philosophy helped her to get and stay sober. She is the author of Higher and Friendly Powers, Transforming Addiction and Suffering, as well as Life on the Rocks, Finding Meaning in Addiction and Recovery. She can, of course, be found on TikTok, Instagram, and Facebook at The Sober Philosopher, and many of her writings and interviews can be found on her website, PegO'ConnorAuthor.com, which I will put all of that information in the description, as well as it will be during this episode on the screen at a different time. But the reason that I just wanted to have Dr. Peg back here and to share her beauty with you as the Recovery Soul Food audience is when I met her doing a Recovery Revolution Live episode, which I'd love for you to go back and watch that. It was just amazing. And I was just sitting in the energy of someone who was breaking down the higher power concept through the philosopher and her experience and the experience of the philosopher William James. And since having that conversation with Peg, it was an amazing, validating conversation in that my recovery journey began outside of 12-step programs because of the very God and Christianity concept. And so many of us have issues moving into that because these perceptions that we have of God, divinity, Christianity, especially in today's climate, can be very skewed. And it can come from a set of programs and beliefs that truly do not belong to us. So I am super excited to sit in this space, in the energy with someone I admire so much. And I believe and I know with all that I am that you are going to now have Dr. Peg O'Connor as one of your virtual mentors. And I hope that you get the book and that you follow up with her because she is an amazing soul. So if you're ready to get into this season 5, episode 2, Recovery Soul Food podcast with me and Dr. Peg O'Connor, we are ready to, so let's go. Dr. Peg, welcome here. I appreciate you so much.
Well, Elsie, thanks for having me on. I'm not sure I can live up to that introduction. And I'll just say, I just go by Peg. The only time I ever use my title is usually when I'm firing off letters to elected representatives for idiotic stances they're taking on things. So
Well,
I'm
that's
I'm
got to
just
be a lot lately.
I'm just plain old Peg. Yeah, I've been busy lately, unfortunately.
I
But
know.
thank you for having me as a guest. Thank you for all that you do for the recovery community with this podcast and in other ways. It's what we do
Yeah.
as recovering alcoholics and addicts. It's the best of us.
It truly is, and to think about where I started, pre-recovery, not realizing that there was a difference between sobriety and recovery, that, sobriety seems to be this exhausting holding back of all the things, the triggers that make us want to drink and use, versus recovery being that space of embracing those things and healing through them so that we're no longer basically a prisoner to those traumas. It's just such an amazing difference, because this was, speaking in public. Peg, I quit high school. I changed my
Mm,
major in college probably 7 times until ultimately quitting because of a speech class, because I just could not bring myself
no.
to be in front of other people. And I think it's
Mhm.
because we carry that dark trauma within us, me being so uncomfortable in who I was and trying to fit some other societal norm that I was terribly failing because it wasn't authentic, and just being so afraid that if I stand up there, people are going to be able to see that I have
Mhm.
all of this secret trauma within.
Yeah.
So I'll just hide. And so to be sitting in a space like this and getting to meet people like yourself and share in other people's journey, it is awe inspiring to me that we get to do this. But you're right. It's one of the greatest parts of the recovery is this
It
gift.
It is one of the greatest parts. And, listening to you talking about hiding, I certainly hid a lot too, and I still do. But my go to is to hide in plain sight.
Mm,
Make sure everything looks so good on the outside. Oh, look at me being all friendly and, doing all the things I should be doing. And meanwhile, I've described it as being in my life where the lights are on, but I'm not home.
mm,
So I never hid in the corners. I would hide in plain sight.
wow.
And that was my adaptive strategy. And I still have to be careful of it even in recovery. That's been a real eye opener for me. Was I've been sober a good long time, but about 12, 15 years ago, I started feeling like I was losing myself. And I kept interrogating myself, like, how could that be happening? I'm not drinking. I'm being a good person. I've got a job. I have responsibilities. I have a fabulous partner. I have a fabulous dog. And meanwhile, it turned out that I was losing myself in whole new ways that I couldn't even imagine. I knew what it was like to lose myself in alcohol. I didn't know what it was like to lose myself in recovery, and that was really jarring. It was another one of those series of moments where I thought I really need to start doing things differently. And
Mm,
thankfully I was able to do so, that I recognized what was going on with me before it got too far ahead of me, because that's the other thing, right? I mean, we get so busy and we're embattled in so many ways, and then only when we've got this moment we look and we think, "Oh my god, what have I done? How have I gotten here? Who am I?"
yeah.
And so, one of the things about recovery is needing to be nimble and
Mm,
adaptable and flexible, and we can become oddly dogmatic in our recovery.
yes.
Take it for granted even.
You're so right. And I love that we're having this conversation, that you bring this up, oddly, because I have found myself in the midst of that place and asking those same questions. Like,
Mm,
wait a minute, I'm still doing all the things, and I'm doing the things that have always brought me joy, but I'm feeling as if there's something new being born within me. And I think the greatest part of what we're talking about right now and what you said is that awareness, that I'm able to kind of say, wait a minute, I can kind of see what's going on, though I
mhm,
don't have any answers or contrast to really try to compare it to. But this is again why this is so important, because often we're going to share something with someone when we have no idea that they're sitting in that exact same space. So, I mean, right,
mhm.
what you just shared is a space that I'm sitting in. And that's why this is so important, because we try to make sense of it in our head. And if there's not any place that we feel comfortable, or if there's not anyone or anything around that we can run this past, it can get
Exactly.
lonely. You can get lost in that. You
You
can
can
wonder
you can
what's wrong
certainly
with
get
me.
lost in it, and it's the reason one of the reasons why I think mutual help groups like
Mm,
AA, NA,
yeah,
Life Ring, Women for Sobriety, that we have people around us who can be a good reality check for us.
so
And
important.
if we're lucky, if we have a support system with the right kind of friends or supportive family members who are able to hold a mirror up to us and to be able to say, to me, for example, Peg, you always said you wanted to do these things, but I see the actions that you're taking actually are moving you further away from what it is that you
Mhm.
say that you want. And that I know in my drinking days, I would drink through groups of friends, particularly as, one group started saying, "You're drinking so much differently from the rest of us. We're really worried about you." So it would be like,
Yep.
catch you later, people. And, we would kind of drink down so we would never be the one who had the worst problem. And then suddenly
Yep.
we realized that we were someone else's comparison. But
Mhm.
our friends, our support network is so crucial to me. I don't see my sobriety as my great individual achievement. I
Yes.
see it as an achievement with and through and because of others. It's my whole life is collaborative, not just my recovery. And, it turns out my addiction wasn't all my fault or all my problems because I drank for reasons. People begin to drink or use drugs for particular reasons. And for some, it's they're looking for fun. Others are looking to feel something, anything different from what they feel, or if they feel very little, and others are looking to numb, and others are looking to excite.
Yeah.
And there's social uses and our drug choices have social meanings. And sometimes we felt like we were coming home when we found people who did use like we did. We didn't feel like
Yeah.
we were the charter members of the island of misfit toys.
Amen to that. Yeah, like, this is my family now. These people
Hmm.
get me. We share this in common, and so I'm home, and we create these things that we now refer to as these trauma bonds, and they become hard to leave when it's time for us to move away from that, even though the moving away is so crucial in order to create that new life. But there is a very real feeling of I'm leaving these people behind, the only people ever that, accepted me for who I was.
Yeah.
And, I there's so many different aspects of that whole recovery process. And I believe that you're right. And that's one of the things I've been looking into a lot lately too. Living in a very rural area, being a business owner and working a whole lot, I often don't make space or time to be in different support groups. And I
Hmm.
think there
Yep.
is this almost, I don't want to call it self-righteousness, but there becomes this very prideful space that says, well, I don't guess I really need that anymore. But I think there are different aspects and different levels of our needs and reasons to
Yeah.
be there versus just the one that says, well, I'm going to go here so that I don't drink or use anymore. When you get
Right.
to a place of years in recovery, that support group becomes a necessity on a different level.
Oh, I think that's absolutely right. And I'll just speak personally here. I work a lot on addiction.
Mm,
It's sort of what I do as now part of my professional life. And I've made the mistake of thinking, well, see, I'm taking care of my own recovery because I'm working on questions of addiction. It's like, yeah, I'm working on questions of addiction, but am I working on myself?
mhm.
Sometimes yes, sometimes no. But I could tell myself, but oh, look at all this stuff that I'm doing. There's a little bit of a sleight of hand there that I know I've had to be careful of.
Yeah, yeah. That beautiful coming right back home to that awareness.
Yep.
That awareness is being able to be real with oneself and because vulnerability works in many aspects. I mean, it's one thing to be vulnerable with others, but there's still a space of being vulnerable with myself that I can be able to call
Mhm.
myself out and say, all right, let's take this apart, and not in a shameful or a guilt-ridden way, but in a way
Right,
that's
but
helpful.
in a loving way.
Yes, yes,
A-
that's the
And
challenge sometimes.
And yeah, that's the huge challenge, right? I think self love is one of the hardest things to be able to generate or if you had it and then you lost it through the course of an addiction, to be able to get it back. So, things like self-love and self-knowledge and self-forgiveness,
Mm,
very, very hard to do.
yes.
That we'll forgive everyone else for everything, and even if other people forgive us, we have a much harder time forgiving ourselves, and that isn't always the good news. And I'm talking genuine self-forgiveness. I'm not
Hmm.
talking letting yourself off the hook. I mean,
Right,
I'm talking
right.
about that kind of, I think of self-forgiveness as an important kind of repair
Oh, yeah.
of yourself, repair of your soul, repair of your heart,
Mm,
repair of you as a person. And I think some of us, even in long term sobriety, still struggle with the should I be able to forgive myself? Because we can look back at opportunities we've blown,
oh, gosh, yes.
mistakes that we've made. And sometimes when other people forgive us for it, we still hold on to that. But I really know what I did, and I really know what kind of person I am. We have this misguided belief that we've got some privileged access to the real me that no one
Yeah.
else can see. And I think that's one of the most harmful views that we carry around. I need to accept that other people can see me really clearly, and when they have my best interests in heart, I'm going to learn about myself through others, but it has to be the right others.
Yes. Yes. Big,
Yeah.
big, big, that's like a big ding right there. And grateful that you brought that up too, because I think that when we throw around, it's become cliche that, through 1 minute TikTok videos and 30-second Instagram videos, and people talk about self-love, I think it's watered down in ways in which we're talking about the bigger and deeper picture of that right now. And I think that in order to kind of get to a place of true self-love and acceptance, number one, there's not a destination. I don't think we ever get there and stay there and here's where we
Mhm.
live. I think there'll always be places that we can evolve and grow, but it's important to have other people in our lives that we can trust with
Mhm.
being able to see us and help us, because if not, to me, it always feels like I'm carrying some type of secret in that, oh, I'm the only one that really knows me. And sometimes other people can give you help on seeing you in a way that, will open your eyes to a place of you that you didn't really see, because I think we get focused in on the places within us that we're used to looking at. And and one of those things that have come up for me so recently is in this, going through this tragedy and a grief process with this, I found myself feeling like I should be feeling guilty. There was a decision that I made a few years ago, and and death and loss, and that always brings up hindsight. So we always
Mhm.
seem to
Yeah.
try to navigate the past through the eyes that we have now, but my contrast for the grief process was to feel guilty and to always wish I could have done something better or different. And as my brain is trying to process all of this, it's telling me, well, we should feel guilty because we made a
Mhm.
decision back then. And to remind myself that, wait a second, that is like an old formula for grief and loss that we've used in the past, but we made that decision back then from our heart. And I have to accept that that was the best decision.
Mhm.
And so it does become this time in extreme loss or grief or tragic circumstances that we go through in our recovery that sometimes shows us the work we've done or how far we've come.
Mhm.
And there does seem to be this place within the mind that wants to handle things and go through these situations in a past formula that
Oh,
doesn't always
mhm.
continue to work.
Yeah, because it is so familiar to us. So it's like a really familiar system gets engaged. And so in some ways
Yep.
you automatically assume that, oh, I'm going to feel guilty about this. And then you might feel like, but I don't quite feel I so you go through this whole discussion with yourself. I feel like I should feel guilty, but I
Yep.
don't feel guilty. Is there something wrong with me that I
Right,
don't
right. Yep, yep.
and you just you do see that, you know, hindsight actually isn't 2020. That's the first move in the conjuring trick, to think
Mm,
that it is 2020,
mm,
because it's not. And the thing that I realize, and I'll just sort of out myself here, is that I'm someone who tends to take responsibility for all things that aren't mine.
mm.
I think it's the flip side of really like being in control of things.
Yeah.
And so for me, the pattern that gets played out is the guilt that's accompanied by what? An overextension of responsibility. I take responsibility for things that aren't mine at all. It's like I can still continue to draw a map from, well, here was my intention and here was my action. And now here are these consequences. And then there are these consequences way out there. But I'm still responsible for the ones way out there. More than likely, I probably wasn't even responsible for the consequences here. But
Yeah.
I know for me, there's always a part that feels like I screwed up so royally that I am still atoning and making amends to the universe. And how I choose to do that is by taking responsibility for things that aren't mine. And that's one of the lessons I continue to learn in recovery is I need to have a better sense of, you know, in philosophy and logic, we talk about the scope of a quantifier. How far does something extend? What's the scope of my responsibility, and why do I always extend it far beyond where it really should end?
Mm, mm. Love that. I love that. I think this is such a great conversation, especially for people who are in that longer term recovery space and find themselves maybe out of that immediate crisis and danger because we tend to get so kind of lax in our recovery process once we move out of that space of being tempted and of relapse and afraid of relapse and sometimes the recovery can almost seem like it gets boring and
Oh,
like is this it until we come to this space of it that I find so interesting in our lives as we're able to sit and examine ourselves and but at the same time it can get so dangerous, can it, when you're just doing this all alone and you that
oh
becomes a
yeah.
coping mechanism of just constant analyzation of oneself. Yeah.
Right. Right. And then, you know, you do set yourself, we all should be authorities on our own experience, on our own lives, and the meanings that we can make. Doesn't mean we're the sole authority
Mm,
on those. And I think that we forget that. And I think you're right. In recovery, we start taking things for granted.
yes.
Um, and when we're newly in recovery or trying to enter recovery, you know, we tend to think of cravings as having a certain character. You know, they're, I describe them as being like a mugging. They come out of the blue and they just, they grab you in a certain way. And those physiological and those immediate kind of psychological cravings subside, you know, the further we're away from our use. But I think there's a different form of cravings that people in long term recovery are particularly susceptible to. And it's akin to if cravings newly in recovery are like a mugging, one kind of crime. Cravings when you're sober for a good long time is more like the long con.
Mm,
So, you know, the cravings look different because you assume, oh, hindsight is 2020. Except, oh, when you look back, it really wasn't that bad, was it? And I'm a different person now. Look at all the work I've done on myself. And, you know, I think it might be possible. I'm not going to go back to the way it was. I fully get that that was horrible. But I think I can probably, because I've done so much work on myself, keep everything that I have in recovery, but now be able to enjoy a glass of wine or a cocktail or, watch, watch football and drink some beer. And the thing about those long con cravings is that we don't recognize them because we think we're immune to them because, well,
yeah.
we're in recovery. We've got such a good recovery. So, talk about a little bit of self deception right there. And we're going to tailor all of our imaginings to what our life could be like. Oh, now that we can have the cocktail or the joint or, whatever your drug of choice is. And we are always going to paint a picture in which everything is going to remain exactly the same with respect to the good stuff. But then we get even more because we get to drink.
Yeah.
I mean,
Ah,
that's why sometimes you see people go out drinking after 25 years or they start using again after a long term sobriety. It's because they thought that everything could stay the same, but they could bring back some of their past behaviors. And that in general doesn't work out.
Yeah, yeah,
And I don't
absolutely.
want to find out for me personally. I've just decided that's become a non negotiable.
I love that, making the non-negotiables. That's an amazing strategy. I sit here on that very same principle as it had been 15 years that since I had ever touched heroin or been
Mm-hmm.
on heroin, and I had this bit of what I call clean time, my sober time, where I was living a life of a very dry addict, no new coping mechanisms, had done no healing on the inside, but I was deceiving myself that I was holding life together. And I had those same thoughts, and it turned into a 9-month relapse on
Mm-hmm.
heroin that I not only affected me, but that brought my wife into the picture as well, who, herself had never used heroin and had never even thought. She was more of an alcoholic, but had never thought about using drugs in that way. But here we were, in this 9-month recovery together. And I always credit that with helping to save my life, because it showed me exactly what you were just talking about. I can't use a little bit. Doesn't matter if I had 15 years away and told myself, it's not going to be the same. I'm going through so much. It's overwhelming me right now. I just need this little release, this escape. The relapse process had started pre-using, as I had surrounded myself with people that were in active addiction
Yeah.
on the guise of mentorship. Here are these
Mm-hmm.
people looking to me for mentorship, and it gave me this false sense of, oh, I've got a little strength here. I've got time under my belt. But I
Yep.
didn't have healing under my belt, and that was very different. And before long, there I was, and there we were. Everything was falling apart again. It's
Mm-hmm.
almost like this place of what we said before, familiarity. I fell right back into it. It's like, oh, I know how to hustle, and things are a little different now, but it was all the same things. And so again,
Mm-hmm.
grateful we're having this conversation as I come up upon this 10-year celebration in my life, because I've never been in a space like this where healing is possible. And again, like you said, it's a non-negotiable for me.
Mm-hmm.
Non-negotiable.
Yeah, because if you spend all day, every day trying to fend off the incoming temptations, it's absolutely exhausting. And
Yes.
that's going to, so William James, this wonderful philosopher, says two things really need to be in place for someone to make a significant change in their life or have a conversion. And one is a sense of sort of what's wrong with these present ways of living. And I think when we're active in our addiction, we can come up with
Yeah.
really long lists of everything that's wrong
Right.
with our ways of living. And sometimes that wrongness is enough to get some of us to stop.
Mhm.
But if we don't have something positive to shoot for, if we don't have something that we really long for that's better, we
Yes.
still get stuck in that kind of incompleteness or wrongness, even if we're not participating in the same way. We're still tethered to it a kind of way. And
Yes.
I think that makes us more susceptible to that relapse because what we're always thinking is, well, I don't get to do that anymore. I can't drink anymore. I can't smoke pot anymore. You
Yep.
know, I can't have any more cocaine. So that's what starts to um, fire up the engines of resentment.
You're
And I
very
think
right.
nothing leads to relapse further than all of the resentment engines firing full force, because
Absolutely.
then it's related to, well, I deserve it. When you move
Yep.
from resentment to I deserve this, versus when you're in a good kind of recovery, it isn't so much I don't get to drink anymore or use drugs. It's more of I don't have to drink anymore
Yes.
or use drugs. And I get to do all these other things that I wouldn't be able to do if I were using. And what's shocking, I think, as we get more in recovery, are the things that we find such great joy in that if you
Yes.
had said to us during our active years, it's going to mean the most to you in 20 years, you'd be like, what are you on?
Right.
Right?
Right.
Instead of saying, I have so much joy just watching my dog run around the dog park. You know, I
Yeah.
could spend an entire Sunday afternoon here. So it's what we get to do.
Yeah.
How lucky are we that we get to do all these things that we probably couldn't even imagine before, and we get to do them. Lucky us.
Yeah.
We
Yeah.
get to have we get to examine ourselves. We get to grow. We get to challenge ourselves. We get to make amends and repair when we have made mistakes, and we can accept limitations. So I teach in an undergraduate institution, so I'm always around 18 to 22-year-olds as I get further and further away from them as I get older and older and older. And one of the things I find myself saying to them more is there is such freedom and liberation in accepting limitations. And
Mm.
they'll look at me like, "What are you talking about, old woman?" And I'll just say the things that I cared about when I was your age, I really don't care about anymore. And I'm still a tennis player. I play a whole ton of tennis. My rotator cuff is that of a 58-year-old woman. It turns out I can't really crack serves hard anymore. I don't even try. Instead of berating myself for why
Yeah.
can't I do it and trying to do it and hurting myself, I just know that I can't do it. Boom, it's that non-negotiable. That's now off the table. I'm not trying to ace people anymore.
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
thinking about the shot that I'll get to hit if they return my serve. It's just a world of difference. And to say that to an 18 to 22-year-old, if a professor had said that to me, I'd be like, mm-hmm, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Right.
okay, boomer. But now and one of the limitations is I can't drink or use drugs. Fine.
Yeah.
Absolutely fine. Better than fine.
Absolutely.
Not missing out on anything.
Not a thing. Not a thing. And that defines that moment of clarity that I came to in that time, because you're right, the resentments and all that was still there. And then the next thing I know, I've gone right back into that life. I'm finding it harder
Mm,
than ever to keep up that, because that space in between of getting, even though I didn't see it as getting to be in communion with my family, in the relationships that I healed, that ended up becoming the catalyst for what helped me wake up and say,
mm,
hold up. And I remember standing there, and I had just gotten out of jail. Here we were, the whole cycle was repeating again. I was out of jail. My wife had just mainlined a shot inside of me through the neck. And I remember standing there
mm,
waiting for the effect to take hold, and for all of the things to go away, the physical sickness and the emotional sickness and the guilt and the shame for all that was happening. And I remember when it hit, and I remember asking myself that question: is this what we're chasing? This fleeting
mm,
moment of numbing, only to be right after this thing again in less than an hour or 2 hours. And what about all of this stuff that means so much to you, Lona, that you've built
mm,
in this time? But I knew something had to change. Like, there had to be some type of healing within the heart. I knew I didn't have the words to say, but I said to myself, I know that my head and my heart have to change. There has to be a healing. I cannot stay trying to hold back a dam of water with my hand of these hurts and heartaches and traumas and emotions and confusion that's within me, and continuously that drive me, that will overtake me. And as soon as, in a moment, that I get resentful, I get exhausted, I get tired, and then we're back at this again. There are
mhm,
things that I need to do at this moment and throughout this that have to change this indefinitely. And that whole having the positive aspect, which since we talked last time, I've gotten to listen to a lot of William James,
mm,
and then compare it to listening to your interviews. And that's where I want to segment into this, because I've ordered the book. I can't wait to get your book, Higher and Friendly Powers, because to me, when I'm reading or listening to William James, it's so helpful to have your insight right there on the other side of that, because it makes it all really truly make sense to me. And so I'd really like it if you could, well, let me just say this one first thing, that the thing that I love about William James and the work so much is that genuine curiosity that
Mm.
he always seemed to have about just human nature, human beings, the human condition, that just never seemed to change throughout all the lectures and the writings that I've gotten the opportunity to read. And so, yeah, let's segment right into the book and William James and how all this came about, and talk to us more about your philosophy about all of this.
Well, okay. And thanks for the plug for Higher and Friendly Powers. This book represents an itch I've wanted to scratch since I ran into my first AA meeting. I was either 18 or 19, and pretty much ran right back out of, because of the God language. So I was raised Catholic and had a certain view of God, and to know that I had a problem with alcohol was a minor understatement. I knew that.
Yeah.
And I knew I was an alcoholic, and this was in the early 1980s. And, so for some reason, I found myself in an AA meeting. And as soon as the steps were read and how it worked was read, I just wanted to run out of there, because that was not a conception of God that I could work with at all. And I stayed away from AA for 20 years after I got sober, pretty much. So I sobered up without AA, and I'm still in and out of AA and all kinds of reasons, because I still trip over the God language.
Hmm.
It's a very hard, it's a hard ask for me to accept that language. God appears in 5 of the 12 steps, and it's a very providential Christian centric God that's not one to which I subscribe anymore, if I ever truly did. And so I had read a reference that Bill Wilson, the founder of AA and he who authored Alcoholics Anonymous, or the big book as we call it, regarded philosopher William James as a co-founder. And I knew that James had died 25 years before Bill Wilson had his experience. So I thought, what's the connection here? So I decided to do a deep dive to figure out what it was. And when Bill Wilson had his final experience at the Charles B. Towns Hospital in New York in 1934, where he said he felt a gust of wind come and it removed his desire to drink, and he understood that God had changed him. And soon after, he thought he was going nuts, whether he was hallucinating from alcohol withdrawal or hallucinating from the belladonna that was used. He just was really worried. And a friend gave him a copy of William James's The Varieties of Religious Experience, which talks all about the spiritual or religious experience of individuals. And for William James, our spiritual impulses are part of human nature as much as our physiology,
Yeah.
as much as our biochemistry. And by spiritual, James just means something that's inside us that makes us want to reach out to something more. And he never really puts any content in what that might mean. But Bill Wilson took that notion of higher power from William James and put it in a very Christian centric framework. So my book, Higher and Friendly Powers, James used the plural, is to try to re-expand and make far more inclusive that conception of higher power, so that more people might find AA helpful, because AA does so much so well, but God as higher power is a definite barrier for many. And
Yes.
so my hope is to talk about all these different higher and friendly powers that don't do anything to you, but they enable you to start to make changes.
Yes.
So that's the hope.
Yes, yes. Well, I'm so grateful that a book like this has come along, and that an author like yourself has come along, because again, that was a big barrier for me, as well as for the 12-step aspect, and just for so long in the midst of that early recovery, I just spent so much time just white knuckling through things, wishing that there would be a place that I could be accepted just as for who I am and where I was. And I remember, I had really gotten into about year two I had found this online, recovery space, and I started sharing from those experiences online and on Facebook.
Mm,
And there were so many people there that were of the 12 step background, but they were also of a very Christian background as well. And it became this pool of what I, affectionately call the dopamine Jesus crowd, as there was just this great dependence on something external,
mhm,
this religious icon that in turn alienated so many people, because it was almost like we traded this one aspect of our addiction into this other space of self-righteousness, where we could then be judgmental, and it became a very unhealthy, way about a place to be. And it was very unhealthy for me, especially as I began into my gender transition. And so I asked this internal bigger question of, well, if there's a God, you know, because I know that I am made this way, I've
mhm.
worked through trauma and I've worked through all of this other stuff, and yet this remains. So either something's really wrong with me and I'm really going to hell, like these people say, which makes no sense, or what is this? And how do I know divinity? And it was this amazing and scary and lonely at times, but very fulfilling journey that I have been on for the past 6 years. It's been amazing to ask those bigger questions.
And you were able to ask them. You got through that alienation. And
Yes,
I always worry about the people who can't get through that alienation because it is a big request. So
yes,
there's someone may be at their most vulnerable, they're at the risk of huge familial or legal or
yes,
professional loss, and they can't just sit down in the chairs and soak up the program because they're too busy blocking these notions of God and all that comes along with it, and they lose the benefits of the program,
yes,
which is really unfortunate. AA is interesting as an organization in all kinds of ways because there's the program, which is what you get in the big book and other conference approved literature, how it works and all that, steps formally. And then there's the fellowship. And every group is autonomous and independent. So some meetings you go to, they may not read the steps as written. They just may always say higher power. They may change the gender of God. They may not read how it works. They won't end with the Lord's Prayer. And others are far more, you would not be, you could be forgiven for thinking, am I in a meeting in 1953, where it's, very, this is the order, we must do it this way.
yeah,
And so it's tough. I mean, I'm in a rural area and AA is the only game around in town, in the counties. So there aren't other options. So my hope is that AA might be more open to thinking about how it could better serve more people struggling with addiction because it's quite clear in the preamble that our primary purpose is to stay sober and to help other alcoholics achieve sobriety. So the program can change, but
yes,
there's prevailing headwinds against it. Although they did just change the description in the preamble from a fellowship of men and women to a fellowship of people.
amen. Love it,
Right?
love it.
Crucial,
Yes,
absolutely crucial. But
yeah,
that's one of the biggest substantive revisions that's been made since the second edition came out in 1955.
wow,
So individual groups can change and be more inclusive, but it shouldn't be a matter of luck
yeah,
that Elsie happens into a meeting that works for you, that Peg
yep,
happens into a meeting that's uh, you know queer friendly,
yep,
all these sorts of things. And our primary purpose is to stay sober and help alcoholics achieve sobriety. It's why we don't talk about politics, why we shouldn't talk about religion,
yes,
but certain religious beliefs are fused into the foundation of the program. But what's interesting is the God language was at what's the way to put this? There were fights about the God language with the very founding of AA and the writing of Alcoholics Anonymous.
Wow.
That one co-founder that gets written out of history because he went back out after about 6 months was Hank Parkhurst. And he was the businessman. He wrote the piece to the employer, and he was savvy in many ways. He's the one who convinced Bill Wilson and the others to hold on to the copyright and self-publish. So 37 million copies later of the big book, you want to say you were right.
Wow.
He was strongly opposed to all the God language because he thought it would, use your language, Elsie, alienate people.
Yeah.
And he was right. So he was the one who pushed for higher power and the proviso with God as we understood him. And Bill Wilson later recognized that that was a crucial change to make. But part of the reason Bill Wilson wrote the 12 steps and the 12 traditions back in the 1950s was he wrote that even he might get excommunicated if he tried changing the steps. So there's always a worry, and this worry comes from William James, who says that one person's spiritual experience serves as a foundation for a religion that grows up from that spiritual experience, or as a program that it can harden into dogma and doctrine and tradition. And you forget that really it was about individual experiences. And
Yeah.
Bill Wilson recognized the exact same thing in the 1960s, saying, I fear that we have frozen this and there'll always be absolutists and fundamentalists and relativists. So I would love it if AA would entertain more discussions about how they could do more for people struggling who can't square themselves or who can't, do the equivalent of the Taekwondo blocking moves.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Because it would be good for AA as a program and for the
Yes.
12 steps. I mean, 12 steps infuse about 3/4 of all in and outpatient treatment centers.
Well, the 12 steps is a brilliant, it's a brilliant type of foundation, because whether you're talking about cognitive behavior therapy, you're talking about trauma healing, the 12 steps honestly incorporate all of that into those things, and it works in my opinion. It works with the way that the brain actually breaks down change, and it gives the brain activities to do. It gives these places where it makes it, I won't say easy to be vulnerable, but easier, because it's
Yeah,
almost like this roadmap to healing. You're gonna start here, and you're gonna take a left here, and you're gonna go. It's much different than saying, okay, you got to get clean, get to it. And there being just no clear direction of where to go. And I knew that in the
right.
beginning, I was missing that myself. And I felt like a blind person wandering through this darkness of, oh gosh, how do I do this? And so as I went through things like cognitive behavior therapy and different things, I always kind of fell back upon the times that I did sit in the rooms and the steps that I did work. And I believe I'm so with you 1000% that if the 12 steps and this fellowship could evolve as life and humanity is evolving to be inclusive. And I know people, when they hear the words inclusive, they automatically think of the LGBTQ plus community and different things, but I mean inclusive of humans as a whole,
Yep.
feelings and beliefs and systems, because we go back to William James and the word genuine curiosity. This is what makes our experience brilliant, is that we can, our rigid systems in our mind keep our lives so small. Those of us in the recovery process, we have this beautiful, I don't even know what to call it other than a gift. We have this gift of visiting the brink of death over and over and over, which gives us this overview on things to appreciate the smallest things in
Yep.
life.
Yeah, and that's a very Jamesian point. One of the lovely pieces he published, but he gave it as a talk in 1898 to a group of young college students at the YMCA, the Young Men's Christian Association. And the title of the talk is Life Worth Living.
Mm-hmm.
And James was someone who
Favorites.
seriously contemplated suicide as a young man. So young man in his 20s. He really didn't know what he's going to do. He lost a beloved cousin. He didn't know whether life was worth living. And he said, in some ways, what I had to do was make a choice to believe that there is free will and that what I do makes a difference in the world. And so, in this piece of Is Life Worth Living, he said, every one of us has to answer that for our own self. But he said, what might be enough is a willingness to live on a maybe or possibility that what I'm doing here matters in some perhaps really even small kind of way.
Yeah.
And he says your belief in the fact that something matters will bring about the fact that it does matter. So it's an interesting relationship between faith and fact.
Yeah.
Faith for James is nothing more than a willingness to live on a possibility or maybe where the results are not certified in advance. And that's what we do in recovery, I think, every day. And that's what we did when we decided to see, well, maybe I can stop using. We didn't know whether we were going to be successful because I think
Right.
a lot of us tried and failed epically,
Yep.
more times than we can count.
Yep.
But maybe we can do it this one time, or maybe there are people who can help me in this self-help group, an other help group, mutual help group. It's all about being able to embrace maybes and possibilities because we traffic in those as much as we do in facts and realities.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
maybe this time, and maybe life is worth living, and my belief that I've got something here to contribute. Maybe I can be a better person. And what James says is that belief that maybe you can be a better person, that's a higher power. That
Yes.
can be a higher power. Moral principles, ideals of truth and beauty, just the idea that there's something more beyond your own embattled, contained, horrified, traumatized self, that there's something more that you can somehow have connection with. And if that seems all too woo woo for some people, it's like, well, aren't you just imposing all these other kind of spiritual, weirdo kinds of things? Think about singing, think about music, the creation of harmony where one voice joins another and there's a harmony that isn't just the sum of the two individual voices. It creates something new.
Yes.
And so, same thing with laughter, I say to people. You can just be walking along and you see two people laughing hysterically. You don't know what they're laughing about. You'll smile and start laughing too.
Yeah.
That can be a higher power. It's just something more than your present embattled self and reality. That's all it is. Not it could be a providential God for some people. Absolutely, James was clear on that.
Mm-hmm.
But for the rest of us, the pride of place example of higher power in James's Varieties religious experience was Henry David Thoreau. Walking in the mist in the woods of Walden Pond, he said, I felt like the pine needles were reaching out to befriend me.
Yes.
You have a sense that you are connected, that you are part of nature. You are one with it. That's a higher power. It doesn't do anything to you, but it changes how you see the world and how you see yourself, and perhaps makes you more willing to try something different, like I'm not going to take the next drink.
Absolutely.
Simple as that. Simple as that.
Absolutely. And it is simple. It's very simple. I think sometimes we complicate it because we want to name it, we want to put it in
Yep.
a box, we need for it to
Yep.
be defined. And when I mentor young people that are either transgender curious or believe that this is their identity, and sometimes it is, and sometimes it's not. And when I mentor people from that aspect, the entire thing surrounds honoring your experience. The temptation is that you want to quietly transition into this new box overnight. And yet, sometimes you get there and you realize, wait a second, that did not create that in which I thought that it would. In fact, it continues to be this new small little prison cell that you've
Yeah,
got to now
constraining.
try to live in. And there may be this like what happened to me is, wait a second. So I'm living a lie on either side. Why not just be me? Why not embrace my experience?
Yeah,
Yeah. And that's what I want to, to convey to people in recovery is that your higher power does not have to be named because someone else's is. And one of the things that I love about being in fellowship with my Recovery Revolution live co-stars and Brett and Jason and JR
mhm,
and Ashley is that we're all coming from such different types of backgrounds. And Jason and I seem to have this closeness when it comes to divinity. And Jason very much so identifies, with a Christian God. But the
yep,
beautiful thing about Jason and his walk with, his higher power and his 12-step fellowship is that Jason is the epitome of that open person that has a curiosity about the human aspect, the uniqueness of each
yep,
individual.
yep.
And that's what
Yeah,
makes that
and
amazing.
so one of the things I hear from you is we make the mistake of assuming the categories are more real than the people in
Yes.
them or the experiences that
Yes.
allegedly undergird them.
Yes.
And the other thing I think is that no one should be threatened by another person's understanding of higher
Yes.
power,
Mm,
right? It isn't a competition, it's not a bake off, it's not anything like that. It's does this work for you? And if it works for you, standing
yes.
ovation.
Yes.
And how cool that whatever I take to be my higher powers, I'm always going to stick with the plural there because that's just how I roll.
Yeah.
But I still learn from hearing my good friends who are, strongly Catholic, for example. I learned from her as she talks about her faith. And I think, okay, we have very different sort of belief systems and understandings, but at the end of the day, I know you're going to be the person right beside me if I need you.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's what really matters. So there's all kinds of reasons why, they say the group can be your higher power because when some of us come in, we can't unpack all this theological dogma and all that kind of stuff. But what we can do is look across the room and someone gives us a kind smile or notices something about us. And one of the ways I described people early in recovery, and I was certainly one of these, was I was a hitchhiker. I had to hitchhike on other people's
Yeah.
views and values. And
Yes.
they could see things in me, changes in me, more clearly than I could see them in myself. And I had to acknowledge that maybe these people had something to offer
Yeah.
me. Like,
Yes.
wait a minute, you mean I'm not totally the worst person in
Right.
the known universe where I'm so bad there's not even categories for me?
Right. Right. Right.
I'm just like you. And I admire you so and look at all that you're doing now. I mean, how fantastic. I'm going to come back to, and we get to do that.
Yes. Yes.
We get to do that.
We get to do that. That's the greatest point of my life that I get to wake up today and I don't stay locked in that identity of the past where today was just going to be a day that I hoped would be the last day that I was on earth. I get to wake up today and I get to wake up and I get to do this thing called life again, and I don't have to get it all right and I don't have to get it all perfect, because what does that mean anyway?
Yep.
What does that even mean anyway when we can learn to honor who, every human being is here on a journey that is their own. And when we get to the place where we can honor that, man, what a world that we
Yeah.
truly get to live in when we
Yep.
honor.
And not be threatened by difference, not be threatened by diversity.
Yes, yes. And I love that
Nope.
you use the word threatened by diversity, threatened by different, because that that is the last ditch climate. You know, we are shifting into what I believe is the most amazing time that is going to be the next few generations. And I hope and I believe that I'm going to get to see a lot of it come to pass. So we're
Mhm.
having those last ditch efforts of hanging on to the old ways of control. And it's very scary, and it can be very unsettling for a lot of human beings. But as we move into the age of the truly divine feminine, because there's nothing more beautiful and strong and able and capable in the world than the divine feminine, the woman, there is just there's so much excitement in it. But at the same time, we have to choose what it is that we lend our energy
Mhm.
and our intention to. And that's another great awesome part of recovery, is that I have a choice today. I am not a prisoner
Yep.
of this one aspect of my life. I don't have to be defined by this identity. And just because I choose not to identify myself as an addict or alcoholic doesn't mean that I cannot partake in the fellowship of AA or 12-step programs. See, I just think that that's a massive thing to make clear, because we're in a space where people are not wanting to own that identity, and that's okay. But there's so many more gifts in the program and the fellowship. And so I just can't wait to get your book and read the book, and just really spend some time in it and that energy. You know, I've got the website going under, and all the places that you can find Peg on social media, but
Well, thank you.
and Amazon. I ordered my copy of the book from Amazon, so you can go to Amazon and type in Peg O'Connor, because she has both two books that I can't wait to. Actually, I'm going to order your first one, because that one just really just that's my jam. You know, the finding
Damn.
meaning. That's my
Philosophy.
jam.
Yay.
Yeah, I love it, and so I can't really wait, and I hope that it really does act as this opening for the fellowship, and for people, that even if the fellowship stays the same, I hope that people find your book, and it gives them these new places, this new category to be able to find themselves in, while partaking of the fellowship of AA and NA and the 12-step programs. And
Well, from
so,
your lips to the universe.
well,
Yeah.
it's
You
happening.
know, there's just
It's
so
happening.
much suffering. We need more ways to help people transform that suffering.
Yes, we do. And why
We do.
not start in the place that is the biggest structure in the sobriety recovery
Yep.
game of life? That
Yep.
is the biggest structure, and why not start there? Because you can find one in almost every area, whether it's rural, whether you're in the city, doesn't matter. There is generally a chapter of AA or NA in existence. And if not, it's
Yep.
very easy to create one there in that area. So
Yep.
it's a go-to. And so I'm so grateful. I can't say this enough, that I'm grateful that you've written this book. I'm
Well,
so
thank
grateful.
you, Elsie. Thank you again for this podcast and for your other work. It helps people become connected and stay found, be a
I hope
lot less lost and stay found. So thank you, thank you.
I hope so. I hope so. Oh, all right. Find Peg on TikTok, Instagram, and Facebook at The Sober Philosopher. And make sure you go to PegO'ConnorAuthor.com and pick up her book, read her other writings, just get to know more about Peg. You can find a whole bunch of different episodes of podcasts that Peg has appeared upon. Just go to YouTube and search Peg O'Connor. She pops right up, and there's so much to talk about. I mean, Peg just, I'm so grateful to know you, Peg. I
Grateful to know
love
you.
recovery. Oh, I love recovery, because
Lucky us.
I
Lucky
know
us.
we get to make these connections,
Yep.
and I just will have a lifelong friendship from this moment on with who I like to call Dr. Peg, because I just think it sounds kick ass. And I love it. I
Ah,
love it. So make sure that all of you make sure that you get hooked up with Dr. Peg and pick up her book. You can go to Amazon again. I can't wait to get it. I will probably have her back on once I get it, because I'd love to do some series from it. I know it's
cool.
going to be a book that's filled with some series and possibilities.
Well,
So,
thanks.
Peg, thank you for all you do. thanks for
Thank you.
spending this time with me, and I look forward to having you back on. And let's do this. Thanks so much, so much, so much for being a
Thank
part of
you.
this. All right, everybody. I hope that you have enjoyed this episode, the season 5 of the Recovery Soul Food Podcast, the virtual mentor sessions. And do all the things, please. Like, share, subscribe wherever you are. This will be available on Apple Podcasts and Amazon Music within the next few days. So do all the things and help us grow this message. Long form content has almost been forgotten about, but let me tell you something. It is sparking back up as people are wanting to move past the 1 minute and 3 minute attention stealers to get into more substantial conversations and connections. And I hope that the Recovery Soul Food Podcast will be one of them. So until next time, you all just have an amazing, amazing day, week. And remember, no matter where you are, you can get up from your give up and you can create a life you love. I'm living proof. Dr. Peg is living proof. And I promise you, you are too. All right. I love you, and we'll see you soon.